We're living in a world of shiny, blinking smartphones, huge ad screens on the street, constant city noises, and a rabbit hole of entertainment on social media platforms. Over time, the voices suggesting a dopamine fast have become increasingly louder. And so do the critics. Opponents point to the fact that the term dopamine fast is misleading because we cannot actually fast on a molecule that we always have in our system. Also, it may seem to be just a trendy new packaging for mindfulness. So we want to know, are dopamine fasts only a trend or indeed a helpful way to increase focus and motivation? Stay tuned for a deep dive into the neuroscience of dopamine and practical tips. Hey folks, thanks for tuning in again. Today for a review of the motivation molecule dopamine and whether dopamine fasts actually work or not. We'll first chat about some dopamine basics, then answer some questions about dopamine's role in everyday life, and finally about a few tips that you can apply in your everyday life. Let's dive right in. All right, how you feel, how motivated, charged, enthusiastic you are, all has to do with dopamine. Dopamine is a chemical in the brain which is not only responsible for a rewarding feeling, but also for motivation, so anticipating a reward, and focus. It makes us riskier, seek novelty and pleasure, and pay attention. Dopamine makes us overestimate time. When dopamine is released at the beginning of a flow state, perhaps you know that feeling of time flying. And it also activates us and makes us more alert. This makes sense when considering that dopamine can be converted into the activating chemicals norepinephrine, perhaps better known as noradrenaline, and epinephrine, adrenaline. Also, neurons that release dopamine co-release glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter, so one that activates other neurons. Bottom line is, dopamine makes us more motivated and focused and also stimulates action, or in the more technical term, sympathetic arousal. In the past, dopamine was important, for example, to motivate us to go hunting when food was scarce, even though we run the risk of predators, natural disasters, and generally leaving the crowd. When you indeed succeed and find food, more dopamine is released as a reward to motivate you to go hunting next time again. Well, today's life is quite different. But especially in this modern digital world that we live in, the price tag attached to this mechanism becomes much more visible. We constantly check our phones, no matter if in company or not. We fail to focus for longer periods of time on one single task. We trade our sleep for another episode on Netflix, binge sugary food. We need music to fall asleep, to get up in the morning, to finish our workout, to work, to spend time in nature, whatever it is. All of these habits can make us feel more irritable, restless, distracted, perhaps even sad. Ironically, I struggled with that myself when doing research for this video. My task didn't only include learning more about dopamine, but I was also a lot on TikTok and Instagram for work. And I mean hours. I was constantly overstimulated, and sometimes in meetings, I forgot what I wanted to say in the middle of the sentence. This really happened multiple times. You remember, Jonas, don't you?
Yes, I do.
The thing is, spending dopamine on things like doomscrolling can actually affect our performance. When we enter flow states, dopamine is released together with a bunch of other neurochemicals and makes us focused, activated, and motivated. We are eager to engage ourselves in our activity and manage to channel our entire attention to the task at hand until we eventually merge with it. In 2013, a group of researchers found that high flow proneness, so possessing the traits conducive for flow, correlates positively with a greater availability of dopamine receptors. So people with the traits conducive for flow have more dopamine receptors available. Again, I'll put the link in the description if you want to read it yourself. In prior research, this availability of dopamine receptors has been linked to low impulsiveness, emotional stability, and positive affect, all aspects that facilitate flow. As we already discussed, however, the habits we've built in this modern world make it hard for us to focus on one single task for long periods of time. We're used to having the next dopamine peak only one click away. But that also means we have less dopamine left for things that actually matter to us and that require our entire focus and motivation. That's why it's important that we think about how we want to leverage our available dopamine. Well, dopamine-producing cells make up 0.0005% of the brain, but they are so powerful that they can affect how other neural circuits work. To be exact, dopamine is not only a neurotransmitter, but a neuromodulator. These are a bit different, as in releasing more substantial amounts, diffusing widely rather than binding to only adjacent receptors, and thereby slowly affecting entire neural circuits. They can even alter gene activity, which makes their effects more long-lasting. Perhaps you've already heard of different dopamine pathways in the brain. There's the nigrostriatal pathway, responsible for movement, and the mesocorticolimbic pathway, the reward pathway responsible for motivation, the feeling of drive, etc. You don't have to remember their specific names, but just to give you some orientation, the latter one is of more importance for us today because this one is active when you pursue goals and that gets disrupted in addictions. All right, imagine you want to be productive. You kind of like your work, so you get to your desk, open your laptop, and then you work 8 hours straight with deep focus and motivation. Or if you're human, you might catch yourself every now and then grabbing your phone, just quickly checking your new messages or scrolling through social media. Even if you consciously decide to concentrate on your task, it can be extremely difficult to resist that temptation. So you might wonder, why is it so hard to resist? Stanford psychiatrist Anna Lembke, who, by the way, wrote a fantastic book called Dopamine Nation. I have it here. You should definitely check it out. I'll put the link to her website in the description box. She states that 4 aspects make a drug, which can also be your phone, more addictive, namely access, quantity, potency, and novelty. This explains why doomscrolling and checking your phone, even when you intend to do other things, is so common. We have constant access to loads of content, as well as endless quantity. Most feeds are a rabbit hole that never runs out. The content is highly potent, as in combining colorful images with flashing lights and upbeat music. And the algorithms know us so well that they provide us with novel stimuli based on what we liked in the past. Pattern recognition actually releases dopamine as well. So if there's, say, a TikTok video with a sound that you know from a previous video, but this time with a different person and perhaps a different context, this will make dopamine neurons fire. I'd be curious to hear what your average daily screen time is. Feel free to put it in the comments. Usually you can look it up on your phone under System Preferences. Okay, so imagine you spend a few minutes on social media, but then realize you have work to do. But now that you're getting back to work, it kind of feels boring. You have a hard time to focus, maybe feel sluggish, and feel the urge to distract yourself. How come that an activity feels less pleasurable after doomscrolling? Okay, now we're diving deep into the neurobiology of dopamine. To answer this question, let's first distinguish between so-called tonic and phasic dopamine. Stanford neuroscientist Andrew Huberman wonderfully and very extensively explains the mechanisms behind dopamine in general, but also how tonic and phasic dopamine interact. He really goes into detail in his podcast episode. Again, you'll find the link in the description. Huberman describes that tonic dopamine is your baseline level of dopamine, the amount that constantly circulates in your system. This baseline level is a good indicator of your mood, whether you're generally excited and motivated, which is indicated by a high baseline level, or rather feel restless, sad, fatigued, indicated by a low baseline level. Where the baseline level is set certainly has a genetic component, but it also depends on our dopamine-seeking activities. We'll get to that later. Phasic dopamine describes the occasional spikes in dopamine above baseline, when checking new notifications, eating your favorite treat, seeing someone you like, etc. This is what dopamine hits refer to. But it's not only the height of the peak that determines how pleasurable you perceive something, as the term dopamine hit may suggest. It's actually the peak relative to your baseline level. If your baseline level is already very high, so you generally feel quite motivated, and you have a peak that is also high, but not that much higher than your baseline level, it may feel less exciting compared to having the same height of the peak with a low baseline level, where you generally feel rather lethargic and low on energy. Tonic and phasic dopamine interact. After a peak, our dopamine level drops below baseline. And this one's important. Our body wants to create a state of balance or homeostasis. That's why we don't go back to the level we felt before, but why the pleasure is followed by a feeling of pain. And this pain can come in form of cravings, restlessness, sadness, something uncomfortable that motivates us to seek the pleasurable stimulus in the future again. As a matter of fact, it's the drop below baseline that drives us to take action again, the motivational aspect of dopamine. And the amount by which it will drop is proportional to the height of the peak. So the higher the highs, the lower the lows. So if there's only one thing you take away from this video, let it be the fact that a dopamine spike is followed by a drop in dopamine below baseline. So if you spend your morning on social media and then try to be productive afterwards, your work may seem less pleasurable than it would have been with a screen-free morning. This is, of course, only one example. It doesn't necessarily have to be doomscrolling. The same goes for other dopamine-enhancing activities. Your everyday life may feel less colorful after this amazing city trip or a night out with friends. You may feel this uncomfortable craving for more after eating chocolate or other sugary foods. Or perhaps meditation seems almost painful after listening to music all day. The bottom line is, any activity feels less pleasurable after engaging in dopamine-increasing activities beforehand. And now you also know why. It's the drop in dopamine below baseline after a peak in order to restore balance. Maybe you think, nah, that's not the case for me. I know how to make things pleasurable for me. I manage to be productive with my focus playlist or make working an event with nice snacks. These are actually examples from my own life, because when COVID hit and we all started working from home, I established new routines to make my work days more fun. I always had cake or other snacks next to my laptop and techno music playing. And I was super productive at first. At some point, the snacks and music just didn't have the same effect anymore. Why is it that what used to work doesn't work anymore to make me enthusiastic and motivated? Why do we need more and more and more to get the same level of pleasure? Well, we've already covered the drop in dopamine after a peak that induces cravings or makes us feel sluggish and more demotivated than normally. Usually, if we wait a bit, the dopamine level will return back to baseline. Unfortunately, we often don't want to endure this pain, and instead of waiting for homeostasis to be restored, we seek more pleasure, more dopamine-enhancing activities. If we chase too many dopamine peaks, these dopamine deficit states will become stronger and longer, and our baseline level will decrease. You'll need even stronger and more potent cues to compensate for the pain experience. That's why Huberman cautions against layering together dopamine-enhancing activities like listening to music while doing our workout or eating snacks while working. By doing that, we'll increase the number of conditions needed to make the activity feel pleasurable, and we'll eventually need louder music and more snacks to reach the same level of pleasure. Some of you may think now, okay, I won't eat the cake while working, but I'll reward myself afterwards with it. Well, from a neuroscientific perspective, that's also not the best idea. Remember the mesocorticolimbic pathway, the reward pathway I mentioned earlier? It not only includes the limbic system with structures like the nucleus accumbens, but also the prefrontal cortex, its mesocorticolimbic system. You probably know that the limbic system is responsible for emotional processing and impulsive behaviors. We also mentioned that in our video on procrastination. Feel free to check it out if you struggle with that. And the functions of the prefrontal cortex involve rational thinking, planning, self-referential thoughts, and subjective experiences. How much dopamine is released into the system, therefore, also depends on our expectation and how we perceive the situation. In other words, if you expect a reward, you won't release that much dopamine during the activity, like work, if we stay with this example, but at the end of the activity when getting the reward. It means that work itself feels less pleasurable. And while dopamine makes us overestimate time, low dopamine levels will make us perceive the time working as passing by much slower. If you only do an activity for the reward, you'll actually decrease your motivation for that activity. Knowing about the brain areas that are part of the mesocorticolimbic pathway also helps us understand why self-talk matters so much for motivation. That the prefrontal cortex is part of the dopamine pathway shows us that our subjective evaluation matters. When you say that you absolutely love chocolate cake, this will most probably release more dopamine than when you find chocolate cake okay. According to Huberman, let me read that one out for you, what we say about an activity and what we encourage ourselves to think about it has a profound impact on its rewarding or non-rewarding properties. That also means, on the flip side, saying,
I hate my job,
or
going to the gym is so boring,
will actually make the experience worse. Instead, practicing positive, encouraging self-talk and actively paying attention to the positive aspects of an activity that you enjoy can help you increase the amount of dopamine for this behavior. It's not about lying to ourselves, but perhaps you can find aspects that you appreciate about an activity. Ask yourself, what do you enjoy about the process? What do you appreciate about the task, the approach, the setting? Tell yourself that the effort you put in is what makes engaging in the activity worthwhile, rather than an external incentive that you reward yourself with afterwards. Knowing about this also explains why children act more impulsively. Their prefrontal cortex has not yet fully developed and connected to the rest of the brain, so they are pulled more strongly toward impulsive behaviors. With all the information in mind we covered today, you may also come to the conclusion that withdrawing from dopamine-enhancing activities every now and then is certainly healthy. We give our body the time to reset our baseline level so we can feel pleasure in daily, more mundane activities again. We can decide by ourselves what to leverage our dopamine for rather than letting dopamine addiction control us. So for the remainder of this video, let's chat about a few tips, suggestions to keep in mind when planning a dopamine fast. The first one is persistence pays off. Lemke recommends a 30-day withdrawal of an addictive activity. For example, watching Netflix, eating sugar, smoking cigarettes, whatever you consider most addictive for you. I won't lie to you, the first days will probably feel awful. What you'll experience is the pain, the drop below baseline, and the withdrawal symptoms that all too often sneak us into engaging in the addictive behavior again. But push through, eventually it will become better and the body will restore homeostasis. The flow sessions, the struggle, and WOOP in the training area of Drive in the Flow Lab app will help you set the course. Then bear in mind the trap of triggers. When planning out your dopamine fast, also be aware of potential triggers that may tempt you into relaxing. If you know that cigarettes are especially tempting after the first beer, you may consider quitting alcohol for that time as well. When perceiving the cue, for example alcohol, a bit of dopamine is released. And as we know, this is followed by a dopamine deficit, evoking cravings and making it harder to resist smoking. Take some time before you start your fast to become aware of potential triggers, writing down the situations where you usually engage in the addictive behavior, how you felt right before, and so on. Also, feel free to improve your impulse control with a flow session grounded in the area of ease of the Flow Lab app. Apart from that, remember that addiction is also driven by accessibility, potency, and novelty, as discussed earlier. Practically speaking, not having sweets or the package of cigarettes in your house in the first place is certainly not an earth-shattering tip, but nevertheless very powerful. Make the cues and addictive substances less available. Also, you may think about how to reduce potency. When tempted to doomscroll, for example, going grayscale on your phone and thereby making it less colorful may be a first step. Turn off any alerts or perhaps even delete addictive apps that don't really serve you. I tried it myself and immediately noticed how much less fun social media suddenly became. Number 4, use pain to get pleasure. By seeking pain, for example, extreme temperatures, exercise, which on a physical level is also considered pain, engaging in boring activities and so on, will tell the body to produce more dopamine in order to restore homeostasis. Anna Lemke writes in her book that I mentioned earlier, let me quickly read it out for you. With intermittent exposure to pain, our natural hedonic set point gets weighted to the side of pleasure, such that we become less vulnerable to pain and more able to feel pleasure over time. If you want to be motivated for work, as ridiculous as it may sound, bore yourself for some time beforehand. Simply do nothing for a few minutes, not even meditate. Work will seem much more intriguing. So why not schedule a daily dopamine fast before work? You can go check out our website, 1minutedopaminefast.com, to do so. The link is, of course, in the description box as well. Because if you think about it, how often do you get an excuse for doing nothing? There's also a flow session called Nothing is Possible in the training area of focus in the Flow Lab app that provides you with a perfect framework for a dopamine fast in the mental fitness context. Well then, as mentioned earlier, extreme temperatures like with cold water can be beneficial for our dopamine system as well. In an interesting study, researchers actually found cold water to increase dopamine levels by 2.5 times, which resembles the effect of cocaine. And this level endured well beyond the painful stimulus itself. In fact, a cold shower helps us to find a focused yet relaxed state up to 3 hours afterwards. So again, persistence pays off. mentally prepare yourself to adopt a strong mindset for a cold shower with our flow session Embrace the Suck in the training area of Drive. Okay, now it's your turn. Time to close the laptop or put away the phone and take the first step to normalize your dopamine levels again. Thanks so much for staying till the very end. We'd be very curious to hear which unproductive dopamine-increasing activity is most difficult for you to let go of. Just let us know in the comment section. And if you can think of a person who might be interested in this topic as well, it always means a lot to us if you share this video. Otherwise, don't forget to subscribe and have a terrific day.